this series I'm doing for the Year of the Horse. And hopefully you watched the first episode, the last episode, because I talk about how it's not really, well, one, I'm not Chinese, and it's not really about astrology, but it's really more about my spiritual journey over the last couple of years and this coming year. So mostly just going to talk about some, like how I'm processing spiritual things I'm thinking about, wrestling with. Let's see. So next week I want to talk a little bit about the Epstein files. I don't think I'm ready to talk about it yet. Not like what's in them, but what they're doing to my faith. Like kind of like they're like deconstructing. It's like the last straw of deconstructing. But today I want to talk more about kind of how science is saving my faith, or how science is saving my soul. And I talked a little bit about this with some friends over the last year or so, a little bit here, a little bit there. And there's been some, as I've been deconstructing and just allowing myself to take in as much information, be curious about different things. I spent a lot of time deep diving in some science, and then also, like, I don't know if you call it fringe science, um, but the things, some of those things that are the newer things that scientists are really kind of studying and beginning to find ways to research. And so one of them has been this idea of consciousness. So if you don't know, scientists and philosophers have really been looking at ways to dig into consciousness and the idea of the mind, not just what happens like after we die, but basically what makes us who we are. And I know all the spiritual people out there are going to say it's the soul, etc., etc. But thinking about this idea of consciousness, like really, what is it? And as they've kind of dug into this, I'll put some resources in the links and some resources in the show notes. But Sam Harris's wife, oh my gosh, her first name escapes my mind, but she has it's kind of like a podcast documentary on consciousness, and she's been in this. It's like 10 hours long, and you can, if you have Spotify Premium or whatever, you can find it on there. I'm sure it's available other places as well. But so she spends this whole time talking to different researchers, scientists, neurologists, all those different people. And kind of one of the things that they're coming to wrestle with is that we've always viewed this idea of the foundation of the universe as time and space, and they're realizing that's not true. And they're wrestling with this idea that the foundation of the universe is actually consciousness. Some of us might even refer to it as divine consciousness. I know back in like the 90s and early 2000s, there was a big thing on intelligent design and stuff like that, and you can still find scientists that talk about that. I think this is kind of like the step beyond that, but this idea that the foundation of the universe is consciousness. Now, of course, once you start falling down the consciousness rabbit hole, then you start like getting into simulation theory and like the Matrix, and like Neil Tyson deGrasse, which I always thought it was Degrassi. I don't know, but apparently he said his name was deGrasse, or deGrasse, or I don't know. I'm butchering his name. Anyway, NTG, like he digs into this is one of the things he's digging into, right? So this is not like wording now, conspiracy theory stuff, right? It's anyway. So I got into that. And so as I was wrestling with that, this idea that scientists are saying, okay, the foundation of the universe is consciousness. And so it's like as I was deconstructing and stuff, of course, everybody's like, oh, and I mentioned this last week. If you watched the video, people say, oh, the one thing I couldn't deconstruct was that spiritual encounter I had with Jesus. And sorry, I'm putting that in air quotes, but I'm just kind of still in the cynical phase. And I hear people say that, and I just want to be like, yeah, because I know they're sincere. But now that I have been on this side, now that I've seen how the evangelical sausage is made, I'm like, stop. Anyway, but as I started to dig into this idea of consciousness, I'm like, oh my word! Like, I use so as I'm approaching the edge of atheism, right? And then I start learning about divine consciousness. I'm like finding myself coming back off the edge of the cliff, and especially when whatever Neil is like, he's not even like an atheist, you know. I don't know how he defines himself. I think an agnostic. I know all the atheists want to claim him, but he's like, I'm not that hardcore. Anyway, so that was, I think, um, one piece that kind of was saving my faith. Like, oh my goodness, this idea of the foundation of the universe is consciousness, right? And then even Neil says that they refer to the parts of science that are still unanswered as the God of the gaps. And maybe you've read about dark matter and all this other kind of stuff. The other thing I started really watching were there's a YouTube channel called Big Think. And so that's where a lot of these philosophers and scientists talk about some of the things that they're studying and the like big ideas, right? And so I fell down the multiverse rabbit hole. Oh my word. This idea of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, that, you know, multiple timelines, those kind of things. I always think is fascinating, right? I like the show Fringe. I have binged that so many times. I absolutely love that show. Anything like that, I'm like, I'm going to be sucked into. So listening to scientists talking about the multiverse, right? And one of the things about this idea of the multiverse that really hit me was I thought, oh my gosh, somewhere there's a universe where 47 is not 47. I don't mean the number, I mean the president. You know, uh, somewhere there is a universe where uh, those in the Epstein files are being held accountable for their actions. I think about the pastors who turned their head and looked the other way against sexual abuse in my denomination. Somewhere there's a universe where they paid for their sins of omission. And somewhere there's a universe where I never became a pastor and inflicted evangelicalism on my family. Of course, there's probably a universe somewhere where I am still a pastor. I guess I'm glad I'm not in that universe. Um, but I guess for me, it helped me to let go a little bit when I started delving into this idea of multiverse, of somewhere there's justice. Somewhere somewhere there's a universe where you're safe, right? Where women and children are safe. Um, Now, does that mean I think we shouldn't stop fighting for justice in this universe? No. I'm just saying that it's helped me processing my faith, um, clinging to hope, moving forward. there's another. I got to get her name and put it in the show notes. But she's part of SETI, SETI, which stands for um, the scientific search for intelligent life. And in her, and you can find her on Big Think also, and she quotes, oh God, see, all the names are escaping me. The guy in the wheelchair. She quotes him, and he talks about, how afraid he was if we were to find intelligent life on other planets, because they would come here and enslave us or genocide, like Earthlings would become existent, like genocide. And her take on that was, well, that's assuming that they're like us. And if they're so advanced that they had the technology to make it to Earth, perhaps they're intelligent, so perhaps they've evolved enough beyond that, right? They've evolved beyond genocide. And that thought just struck me of, in 100 years, will we be more evolved where there's no more genocide? I don't know. In the last 200 years, obviously we haven't, which is one of the reasons why I want to talk about the Epstein files, and what that's doing to my deconstruction. But not today. She says, she's talking about a global perspective is what she's talking about. But she uses the phrase Earthlings, and which of course makes me laugh because I think about Bugs Bunny. Hello, Earthlings. But we've used the phrase human beings so long that maybe that has, like, we've neutralized the phrase. Maybe we should be calling each other Earthlings to really erase national borders, kind of a thing. Without some kind of a major revolution, I don't see how we are going to evolve beyond genocide in this universe. Hopefully there's a universe where we have evolved beyond it, which I guess gives me a little bit of hope. And I have to admit, there's a part of me that, how much of a role does religion play in keeping us from evolving to be more like Christ? Which is another thing also about science, which I find fascinating. And I had talked about this a couple of years ago. I had shared a video that Rob Bell had done. If you've ever watched his Everything is Spiritual tour, about 10 years after his first tour, he redid the Everything is Spiritual tour. And he was talking more about quantum physics and quantum mechanics and the role that played in him, in his own faith journey. And so in that video, Rob Bell is talking about this idea that the universe is continually expanding, which is true. This is science, okay? If you're watching this and you don't believe in science, you're going to hate all of these videos, so just move on. Anyway, he's talking about the fact that the universe is expanding. And I remember when I watched that video that I thought to myself, and at that time I was still evangelical and thinking about this idea of the book of Revelation and how, Jesus returns and the kingdom of heaven comes down out of whatever up there, comes down here, and God dwells among us, and blah, blah, blah. And then I thought to myself, what if John's revelation was that he saw the universe expanding to the point where we become one, right? Like the universe just keeps expanding, expanding, expanding. Like, and so in John's mind and what he's seeing, the only way to describe it is heaven comes down from above and God dwells with people on earth. But what if it's just that it's expanding, expanding, and expanding, and we're getting closer and closer and closer until we kind of all become one? And I remember posting this at the time on, I think I posted it on LinkedIn because it wasn't like where I normally post stuff like Facebook or whatever. I've never really been on Twitter. And evangelicals just coming after me, like people who knew me personally who are evangelicals just coming after me that I would even suggest something like that. I'm like, are you serious? Like, I mean, that seems pretty realistic to me. That like we just think everybody in the Bible completely understood 100% what they were seeing and what they were hearing and what they were experiencing. Like, are you telling me that your faith has never evolved from one moment to another? I mean, I sure as heck hope that my faith is more evolved than it was when I was freaking 25 years old and barely had a fully formed frontal lobe. And again, there are a lot of evangelicals who do not have fully formed frontal lobes who are my age or older. Anyway, I digress. So there's some things about science that have kind of helped me hang on to faith in some way, shape, or form. And another one is the telepathy tapes. I kind of want to talk about the telepathy tapes all by themselves. I don't know, maybe down the road, but there's one part in the telepathy tapes that I want to share, which I mean, again, it's kind of fringe science. I wouldn't say pseudoscience. I'm going to say fringe science because I think, especially after listening to this series, that over the next 5 to 10 years that we're going to see people like Neil doing serious research on it, because we already have some pretty big scientists and doctors and neurologists doing research on it. Anyway, I highly recommend you listen to the telepathy tapes if you're interested in any of this kind of stuff. And so the first season is all about autistic non-speakers, mostly children and teens and some young adults, who use telepathy to communicate, mostly with one another, but then sometimes with their teachers and then with their parents. And anyway, there's this, I hate to ruin it for you, but whatever. It's your fault. It's been out for over a year if you haven't listened to it. They talk about this thing called the Hill. And so a lot of the autistic non-speakers at night or when they're laying in their bed will telepathically visit this place called the Hill, which is where basically it's their hangout, where they meet with other autistic non-speakers. And they have full, what do you want to call it, virtual relationships, where they learn from one another, they teach one another. Like some of these autistic non-speakers have started communicating with through computers or spelling boards or whatever, and like they know 3 different languages. Anyway, it's just incredible. But that's not the part. Till Kai Dickens, she's the main interviewer and producer and everything. She asked the question, well, can anybody go to the Hill? And, well, I mean, obviously you have to be able to telepathically get there. But they make the point of saying of no. Because in order to get there, like one of the requirements is to have good, pure intentions. Like people who want to go there and manipulate and control and hurt them cannot come to the Hill. And that was one of the first things that got me of, so maybe there is one safe place in the universe. And like at that time, the Epstein files were just starting to like when I was listening to this episode, we're just kind of starting to be talked about, right? I think when it was released, Epstein had just died in jail or something like that, or maybe he hadn't even been arrested yet. So definitely none of the files have been released. But I was really wrestling with, if you don't know my story, after being an evangelical pastor for 20 years, I left because it had become known that there was a pastor who was covering up sexual abuse. And then, of course, a bunch of other leaders kind of jumped on the bandwagon to cover it up. So I used my platform of my other podcast to bring it to light because I knew that unless somebody came out and publicly accused them, nothing would be done. Nothing. It's going on 3 years, so we're still waiting to see what happens. But if people disbelieve women, anyway, so I burned everything to the ground in order to speak out for these children, young women, and then children who were being spiritually and sometimes sexually abused. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is hearing these nonverbal autistic children talking about a safe place for them to just be themselves was so healing for me. And that was actually the first thing that got me falling down the science rabbit hole of, does science have any other hope to offer? And so when I say that science is saving my soul, I'm like, yeah, it is. Because science is giving me hope that there's still some good in the world. There's maybe some safe places in the world. Maybe there's another universe where justice happens. So anyway, I guess that's all I have to say about that for this week. Come back next week when I tear the evangelicals a new butthole talking about the Epstein files. All right. Hope you have a great day.